Welcome to the Rundown, everybody. I'm your host, Dr. Sam Zehnder, physical therapist and fitness expert slash enthusiast. Hope you're enjoying your climate wherever you're tuning in from. If you're in Wisconsin or the Midwest in general, it's been a little bit warm, so hopefully you're indoors and enjoying that AC. And it's a very Midwestern thing, it seems, to talk about the weather and enjoy talking about it. Clients and I love to hit it off with that as soon as the appointment starts. Love to talk about the heat. So I always told myself when I was younger, I'm never going to be doing that because I heard my parents talk about that, and that was like an old person topic, and 30 years old talking about the weather. But other than that, today we're talking about identity and what that means in terms of injury, rehab, recovery process. If you've been following along the past couple weeks, I've been trying to be as transparent as possible about my own recovery through these, minor to moderate sprains that I've had in my elbow and knee. And not that I want to keep talking about myself for the sake of being narcissistic or seeking attention, but I do want to use my experience to hopefully help other people appreciate that these kinds of experiences and thoughts and feelings can be had by somebody who is even an a quote unquote expert in the field. Somebody might tell me just, well, look at your notes, bro, like you have all the answers in school, right, or from school. So this should be no big deal. And yeah, for sure, having a background in working with individuals who are recovering from an injury, that helps certainly, but there's also a very strong human component, human element that everybody's going to have, myself included. And all of these thoughts and feelings are almost, I would say, unavoidable, right? And it's not that we have to avoid them, right? You might have some feelings that you automatically think are bad or negative or harmful, but by and large, they're just human, right? There's nothing right or wrong about them. It's just how we're made. So, specifically, what I wanted to touch on is this sense of identity, and the reason for this is over the past couple weeks, things have thankfully been steadily progressing for me, but so that's been helpful. Of course, it always helps your mood if you can tell like you're slowly getting better or quickly getting better. But I've also had the thought that with as fortunate as I've been over my past 20, 25-ish years of organized sports and activities, having very little experience with injuries, been very lucky. Nothing significant. Certainly, this is probably the most significant injury that I've had. Even despite some of those, minor aches and pains and tweaks, if you will, I would have maybe a sense of despair or a loss of identity, feeling empty. If I missed a practice or missed a week of practice, watching your friends do things that they enjoy and that you enjoy, and you can't participate in that. That's hard, even if it is short term, and certainly part of that is just being a child. Your sense of time and your sense of seriousness is very I don't want to say skewed because that makes it sound like that your feelings don't matter, but it's very different, of course, than an adult, right? Time and life is going to change our perspective on everything, really. Um, but outside of the injuries, probably the most potent example of a loss of identity or loss of self identity that I could relate to would be when I stopped playing football. So I played football for what would be probably 10 years, fifth grade through, the start of my sophomore year of undergrad. I quit playing during the training camp for sophomore year as I didn't feel healthy, didn't feel like my head, my brain was in a good spot. I was getting headaches much more frequently, and going to a Division III school, knew that the long term outcome was not ever intended to be or going to be professional or semi-professional football. I was in school primarily to be a physical therapist. I picked my school, Concordia, right down the street here, for that reason. But I love playing football, so I wanted to do two things at the same time, and was in a position where I felt like I had to make a tough decision. So I did, and don't at this point have any regrets. But at the time, and probably for the next 12 months after I decided to stop playing, it was a very empty feeling, and I don't want to overstate it because there's people that go through circumstances much worse than mine. I was able to at least choose when I ended my football career. Unfortunately, many people that choice is made for them through some traumatic injury or from something much more serious. So again, not trying to overstate the situation, but to be fully transparent, it did feel like a huge part of me was gone, right? And you have this thing that you've identified with participating in for years, through your formative years, high school in particular is, I think, where a lot of us really become either entirely or in large part the kind of person that we're going to be for most of your life or all of your life. And so through those very formative years, football was a huge part of what I did and who I was and my identity. Still took school very seriously and still, was I would say well-rounded thanks to my parents being grounded and having me in different types of activities and having a very strong family life at home. All of that helps. But if you'd ask me, who are you or what do you do? Say I'm, play football. That's my identity. That's how I think about myself. And so when that stopped occurring, when that stopped becoming part of my life, it felt like part of me was missing. Part of me was no longer there. And so how do I fill this void? And I've talked about this previously in other episodes where went from football into Olympic weightlifting, did that for a few years, did a couple local meets, which was a ton of fun. And then from that, got into CrossFit, ironically, because I used to be a fairly outspoken CrossFit hater, I'll admit, for various reasons. Thinking, oh, those aren't real pull ups, and, CrossFitters just get hurt all the time. And it's, have your opinions, if you will. That's the beauty of this country. But needless to say, I've done a bit of a 180 there, and it's very much opened up my eyes to fitness in general. But that's what I've done, and then into jujitsu, and along all of those phases of activities, right? All of these other, para fitness phases have also occurred, right? Getting married, having kids, getting house, all of that, and that's, of course, probably the more significant part of life. But fitness is kind of the direction we're heading in our discussions here on the episode. So we'll focus on that, but. Through those last couple, steps after football, you start to develop maybe a different kind of identity, right? I never necessarily latched onto anything else quite the same as I did football, and it wasn't because I didn't enjoy any of them. It's not that I didn't enjoy Olympic weightlifting or CrossFit, but you're at different phases of your life where other things start to matter and other things start to take priority, and your sense of identity and how you attach yourself to those activities very much changes, right? So I'm in fifth and sixth grade, first starting out in football. That's one of the most profound parts of my life. And I don't have responsibilities per se. Yes, I do have to go to school, but I get taken to school, I get picked up from school, right? I got to do a couple assignments in middle school, but that's pretty bad. Like your life's pretty irresponsible or minimally responsible, I'll say it that way. So showing up and working hard at football practice, that was like my job, right? Whereas now, of course, I'm in a phase having wife, kids, business, home, all of this. The responsibility is very different, and I have dependents, and the sense of identity very much changes. And what I attach myself to, as far as being important, very much changes too. So I say all this to set the stage that over the past couple weeks now, my outlook and my perspective on the injury process or recovery process and not being able to do the activities that I'm used to doing, that I enjoy doing, CrossFit, jiu-jitsu. It has not been fun, of course. I would much rather be able to do those. But the other day, I recognized I recognized the lack of the despair, the empty feeling that I had with football, for example, and kind of thought about why that is. And I think it really does come down to that word, identity, right? How have I identified myself differently now, or where's my sense of identity come from differently now compared to back then when I was, a 19-year-old kid. And now this sense of identity is as a father, as a husband. I'm a Christian as well, always have been my whole life. And so that, if you're asking me what's the most important part of my identity, being a follower of Christ, that's always going to be number one. But in a world of things that change outside of faith and God, and your relationship to God, your identity on earth anyways can shift according to the situation. And so very much so the identity has changed from being an athlete, being a football player, to now being a husband, a father, a provider, a business owner, that sort of thing. And fitness, of course, being a physical therapist is a huge part of that, and it needs to be integrated. It's not to say that fitness is not as important, or being in the gym is not as important, or I don't care about it. If anything, my health means much more to me now even than it did 10, 11 years ago when I prioritized it to stop playing football, because I'm doing it not just for myself but for those around me that depend on me. But since I'm able to, thankfully, still be able to do those, provider things, still be a dad, I still have my family with me. My kids are a huge blessing. My wife is a fantastic blessing in my life. That's where my sense of identity is now in the day to day. And so, despite not being able to participate in the gym and be with that community, who is also very important to me, everybody I meet there and interact with there is a huge part of my life. But despite that, I have that sense of identity because what has what has grounded me is different than back when I was a kid, let's say. And so the point being ultimately that I hope you all have a good sense of identity where that keeps you grounded despite the waves of life, right? If you are somebody who is, let's say, a high achieving professional, and you also enjoy being competitive outside of work, maybe it's marathons, Ironmans, CrossFit, maybe it's even as something like your beer league softball, whatever it is. If you take that seriously, I'm all for competition. I'm an incredibly competitive person too, and so don't take this as none of that matters or none of it should be important to you. But hopefully, it's not the number one piece that grounds you or that identifies you, or through which you identify yourself, because that is something that is going to change, right? We're not going to be able to participate in those kind of activities all the time. The aches and pains are going to happen. Maybe it doesn't stop you from training, or maybe it doesn't prevent you from being able to compete. But if your standard of high quality of life is dependent on how you feel each day in just your fitness, I would argue that your happiness, your joy, your sense of fulfillment in life is very much going to be tumultuous compared to if you are able to find more of a grounded identity in things that are more consistent, things that are more lifelong, family, for example, other relationships. It doesn't necessarily have to be family per se, but I use mine as an example to say that my kids are, Lord willing, not going away. Wife's not going away. Everything is going to be there at the end of the day, regardless of how I feel, or regardless of how a workout went, or regardless of if I'm able to go to the gym or work out hard or not. Ultimately, what matters is that I'm able to be present with family, and I'm able to be there for them, and they're there for me, and that's where the identity comes from. And there's a lot of strength in that, and a lot of value in that. That no matter how I'm feeling physically, that identity is still there because it's rooted in something that is stronger. And again, going back to faith, I think that's an important reason why having a strong relationship with God is important. He is unwavering. He is not changing, and not necessarily to turn this into a sermon or a lecture on religion per se, but that's really, I think, one of the main values of my faith in particular, is that despite all the ups and downs, the waves of life, the constant North Star, if you will, the guiding principles are unwavering. On earth, though, in a more tangible day-to-day sense, again, that's where I think family and relationships and your sense of community is critical. Maybe you live alone. Maybe you're in a large city and your family doesn't live with you, or you just live away from them in general, and you don't have kids. Your life could be very different than mine. Many people have very different lives than mine, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. So then it just the question becomes, well, where can I get that sense of community? Where can I get that more consistent sense of identity And despite this being a fitness and health podcast or show, I would actually encourage you to maybe not root yourself entirely in your fitness or entirely in the specific activity that you do, because we are much more than just biological creatures. We are much more than muscles and flesh and mitochondria and hearts and lungs, right? There's much more to us and to the human experience than trying to perform our best in exercise or in sport. And again, I'm as competitive as any other person in the area. So don't take this as me saying that a competition is irrelevant or that it's not important. And if you take yourself seriously or if you take your activities seriously, that you're just being childish, because that couldn't be further from the truth. I think competition is extremely valuable, and we should all have something competitive in our lives that forces us to push ourselves, because otherwise complacency can be the silent killer for many of us, living an inactive life and feeling no sense of fulfillment because there's nothing that actually drives you or pushes you to want to be better. But having that sense of a identity rooted in something that is more constant, more lifelong, fulfilling, something that will give back to you as much as you pour into it, is extremely beneficial, and something that will stay with you throughout those phases, right? I mean, I just outlined how my fitness and sport journey changed dramatically, even between 19 to 28, 29, 10 years, trying multiple different types of activities. But family, for example, for me, that's constant. That stays consistent. That I always know who my family is and who's got my back and who's there to support me, and that part is not going to waver or go away. And so when you have that sense of identity, when the downs do happen, the valleys of life, whether it's a minor ache and pain or whether it's something major and you're not able to engage in activity that you love, if your identity is rooted in the things that are more consistent, that are unwavering, recovering through that process is so much easier. And I see this happen all the time for athletes or active individuals where that's not the case, and their sense of self-identity is rooted in that activity that they want to do. And that's a hard conversation to have, because who am I to say how you should feel about something, or who am I to say that your perspective is maybe not the healthiest one? I'm not here to tell people how they have to think or how they should think or feel about certain things, but I do think that there is value again in having the identity rooted in something that is more consistent and that can help you balance out the ups and downs of life. Because I've worked with many individuals who don't have that sense of balance, and it's a difficult spot to be in for myself, because again, I don't know all the intricacies of their life. As much as I want to ask questions about their past experiences and their history, I can't fully appreciate the entirety of another human's experiences in life up until the point that they've met me. Certainly, the older they are, the more experiences they've had too. So that conversation and that perspective can only get tougher to mediate as a provider. But I do feel like the people who recover the best they have the most stability in their mental, their spiritual, their emotional states. And the research to an extent backs this up as well, right? Our mental status significantly will affect our pain levels. It'll affect our prognoses. It'll affect, what's the likelihood that this acute injury turns into something more chronic. Not to say that that's 100% of the issue or 100% of the effect, but in general, the more grounded you are, the better outlook you have on life or on your current situation when you're in pain or going through rehab, the better that you're going to recover, probably the faster you're going to recover, and probably you're going to recover with fewer impairments and fewer limitations in life. And again, my perspective would be that much of that has to do with the non-physical parts of life, the emotional, the relationships that you can develop, the stability in your community, in your family, your home life, or at least in your nearby community. Again, if you're living alone, this might look or feel different for you. But have people around you and have an environment around you that encourages you to be better, helps build you up, helps keep you consistent on what's most important, and gives you that sense of identity that is unwavering despite how you might feel or how your body might feel or adapt to your fitness or to your activity. However, there are things that are more consistent and more lifelong than the acute training bout or the acute training cycle that you're in. So, whatever that means to you, find your sense of identity, keep yourself grounded, and you'll find that your pain and your injuries and your recovery process all become much less significant, much easier to tolerate when you have all of those other pieces surrounding you, keeping you grounded and keeping you rooted in that sense of identity that goes throughout your life.